thing. I found this really fascinating. I don't know how to explain it. Do you guys ever think there was a game that started a trend that boiled things down the best they could be boiled down? You know what? Maybe Vampire Survivor is a good example. Because, like, how do you boil something down more than Vampire Survivor? And Slay the Spire, me and Axolotl talked about it in the Axolotl interview about how Slay the Spire boiled down, kind of like some card architecture, kind of like boiled down to its core form. And they hit like on all these like principles, like these certain numbers and things like that that like feel really good. So when you try to reinvent the wheel, it kind of just like feels worse because they boiled it down really well. And so other deck builders come up with like different mechanics or new mechanics to tread a different path or add new things, because if you boil things down, they will eventually get to kind of like Spire. Which is a really interesting concept because of what's happening here with Slay the Spire 2. Since they already boiled down this, like, all these perfect numbers in Slay the Spire 1, it seems like they're having a hard time creating more emergence and variety for Slay the Spire 2 because they're trying to have the same conversation and not a different conversation, say, like Doom Dark Ages. So I find this really fascinating what's happening here. We can do some MS Paint stuff. Bright light, bright light. Okay, it's gonna be hard to find the words, but I will do my best. Edit with Paint 3D. What is that? Make this image 3D. Oh, never mind then. Okay. How do I do this? So one of the things that we've learned over the years is that with Slay the Spire, what happens is what it is really good at is this very like formulaic, balanced kind of like drafting game where a lot of things are boiled down to their core, right? Like the mana to number ratio, the mana to card draw, and how many cards you draft, right? You draft out of 3. And like all of these things, like pay this to draw 3 or pay this to draw 2. And every other thing that people come up with to mess with that stuff feels like more convoluted or just trying to add things on top, because at its core, they boiled things down very well into its architecture. Again, watch the Starvaders interview with Axolotl, and we talk about this. And you know, so like other games could be like, oh, you can draft out of 4, but then it just feels kind of like random. And then you could also be like, oh, I draft out of 2, but that just feels worse, right? Like all the numbers are boiled down to their finest places, right? So like in and of itself, we can change the conversation and we can add things and change the conversation, like Monster Train, right? We're not going to boil the archetype of cards down because Slay the Spire did it, but we can change the conversation. Now you're putting units and playing cards on them, and we're changing the conversation, right? Or like Vault of the Void or whatever. And so they did this really, really well, right? And so because they did it, it's really interesting because now every other game is a weird evolution of like trying to add something on top of that box. So we'll say this is the add-on to the box. Right? And then whatever other game, Vault of the Void, whatever, they can change the conversation, but if they try to do the same thing, it ends up feeling tacky. Like Knock on the Coffin Lid, for instance, right? because all the balancing and all the numbers and stuff like that have already been meticulously kind of done in Slay the Spire. So there's this weird phenomenon now that I've never really seen before, at least from this perspective, because now I'm a lot more deeply plugged into design, right? Like I would say that my design skills are very far ahead of the market, not in a cocky way, right? This is just what I do. I just nerd out on this stuff. So what's happening here is this weird phenomenon where all of these games were pushed into a place where they can't really make a well boiled down game because we have that already. So what they do is they add stuff and they add tricks and gimmicks and stuff like that, which is cool. But now what happens is with Slay the Spire now trying to make a sequel, knowing, remember, that we boiled this stuff down to its core, that they can now not follow that same trend. They already did it and figured out those numbers. So now they themselves have to add gimmicks. They have to add stuff on top of their well boiled down numbers, right? Oh my god, music's a little loud. Yep, no problem. That should be better. So now there's this weird phenomenon where what other games had to do, now Slay the Spire has to do to themselves. This is really fascinating for someone like me, because now they need to come up with this. They have to come up with their things on top of their well boiled down systems because they can't just boil it down more. That's been figured out. Now they need to add more variants and shenanigans, right? So now these other games that got a really big head start and have took deck builders so many different ways, because remember, they can't go the boiling down formula, right? Because Slay the Spire did it. So they have to go the other way. We have to add things on top and do all these cool things, right? So now Slay the Spire has to do that, in which other people did these things and had to do these things to an extent already, right? Whether it's slotting gems into cards or spell rogues adding variants and random kind of extra gems on cards to sway your decisions, or any stuff like this, all of these other games have had to go really, really, really far already, right? We have the spell rogue and the Monster Train, right? And we have like all these games that have had to do Wild Frost, right? We have all these games that had to do these cool stuff. So now there's this weird phenomenon like Megacrit going, damn, what do we do now? Because all of these other guys, now we have to be in their park. We have to do this stuff now to add variants and something new, because at our core, we did all these things already. We already boiled everything down. We have to add these things. So that's why I find this very fascinating, is Megacrit seems to be having a hard time adding emergence and gimmicks that are new. Now they are the ones adopting from other games, because other games got forced into that spot where they had to add the gimmicks already that were interesting. So if you look, there's this weird phenomenon, I'll back it up with evidence. You could see how they're trying to spice things up and make it juicier and gamified, blah, 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 but that's not the important part. The important part here is they've been trying to add more emergence and variants, right? Because they can't boil things down. They already solved that, right? They already solved that. So you could see things like here, added 3 shivs into your hand, exhaust, right? The Silent gets to play with a new shiny mechanic, and they call it Sly. If this card is discarded from your hand during your turn, play it for free. Well, we played like 5 other deck builders doing this mechanic, because now they're not leading the pack. They did that already. Now they have to adopt the extra stuff from other games, right? Like Sly, discard this card, do it. Now, this is a great mechanic, but it's really interesting because now they're the ones that have to borrow, right? These are things that we've now, they're going to be in a park where we felt it from other games now. So what they're going to have to do is put themselves in like a spell rogue position, right? And what I mean by that is, well, there's a bunch of things that we felt before. This is going to be a Frankenstein of good ideas that other games do, and just hopefully a little bit better. Now they have to do what like Spell Rogue has done and stuff like that, right? Because they're not going to be able to just come up with new ideas without it being super gimmicky. Now they're in that ballpark that they forced other people to be in. And I find this very, very fascinating. Sly cards are automatically played for free when they're discarded. Cool, yeah, and we've seen these kind of things before, right? Do something on discard. Looking forward to seeing all the ways you manage to break this card or die trying. So this is really interesting, but it doesn't stop there. Every single new mechanic that they've announced so far is adopted from another game now, because they're in that position now. I don't think I've read this one. Let me read this one real quick. I think I skipped this one. Those who are savvy enough to look under the hood, Slay the Spire's code. A creature that wants you dead will afflict some of your cards in sort of mean. Oh! So now is it, what it looks like is enemies are putting debuffs and stuff on your cards. Again, adopted from other games, right? We've had for a while now deck builders saying, hey, I'm going to curse your card, right? I'm going to curse this thing. Hell, Starvaders, those, right? And games before Starvaders. So you can see here that they're the ones grabbing good ideas from like other games because we tread that path already. Once your cards are promptly afflicted, you end up with something like this. Vulnerable enemies take an additional 25% damage, lose a mana. So now they're adding variants to your cards with enemy identity to make enemies more interesting, because what are they going to do? Add multi-strike to an enemy? Nice try, right? So this is very fascinating. I didn't even read this one, but you can see it follows exactly what I'm saying here. We can go even further where they add this spell rogue kind of thing. Where is it? Where is it? This is very fascinating, the position they're in now. Not that it's going to hurt them, but I just mean that, you know, it's quite the challenge. Because now all of these ideas are not the new kid on the block anymore, right? These are ideas that we've been experiencing for years now. Even their upgrades, up things have been very dated. Is this the one? In Slay the Spire 2, you may run into a new modifier called enchantments. As probably surmised from the name, enchantments are modifiers to cards in your deck that are applied for the duration of the run. While the majority of common enchantments will give you a slight edge here and there, the more meaningful and potential run-defining enchantments can be discovered in events. So here we're going to see, upgrade your card with an enchantment to add emergence, right? This is interesting because, again, this is like what made Spell Rogue really fun, right? It's not just your cards and how you can morph them, but sometimes you can get this random enchantment or gem on a card to add that extra variance. Hey, I wouldn't normally take this card here, but this RNG'd a nice enchantment. This makes it a lot more tempting. Should I actually do it? Hey, I wouldn't normally take this strike card, but it has a random enchantment for discard, and I do happen to be making a discard deck. Now it has more incentive, right? So now they're borrowing all of this extra like mechanics and emergence from other games, and this is just an interesting phenomenon. This is just a very, very interesting phenomenon. And I think this is also what happens, and shout outs to the people that made the Doom games, where we talked about this sometime last year, where if you keep trying to have the same conversation, eventually you can't keep one-upping yourself. So you either change the conversation to make it something different, right? Don't play the same game, right? So what happens here is because we are trying to make the same game and we're not changing the conversation to like a different format, right? Now we have to one-up ourselves, and you can see now they're having a harder time, or it seems like that to me, so they have to borrow from other places. This is so cool. This is so fascinating. This is so fascinating. So it leads to this effect. It leads to this. Them starting, other people having to adopt and adapt to the idea, to now them having to adapt and join them. Very fascinating. Very fascinating. And this part, honestly, could go a very long way in Slay the Spire in the end, because they're emergence. Like, if you want a card or don't want a card, most of the time that does kind of stay where it's at. It doesn't have that extra layer, again, like Spell Rogue, where like, hey, there's more incentive to pick this type of card now because there's that extra variance factor. How we use that card is going to change run to run. And so now them borrowing those ideas, it could do a lot for Slay the Spire's world. Highly polished ideas, they have to work on their own stuff first, you know, like information, their drafting screen, all of that kind of stuff, which I would assume they learned from Slay the Spire as they added that kind of stuff over the years while it was in early access and stuff like that. So it's just going to be really interesting because, like, remember, deck builders have gone so far, but Monster Train 2 was a big awakening because Monster Train 2, Monster Train 1.5, they can just drop Monster Train again. And it's still very ahead of the current deck builder market because the deck builder market hasn't gone very far in some aspects. So for instance, like Monster Train made the event system very, very exciting, like Lone Star did. And then when you play 90% of other deck builders, they didn't learn anything and they still do very boring ones, right? So there's like a lot of aspects where we just haven't went that far. Positional stuff, people do seem to be liking the positional stuff. Can I picture it for their game? I cannot. It makes it a lot more exponential, or at least it has the power to make things a lot more exponential when you design that way. And remember that Slay the Spire is known for its very meticulous numbers and like every decision counts. So I can't really picture that because it's going to be a lot harder to balance. Not saying that it wouldn't be fun. I can't imagine them doing it particularly. I could imagine a artifact that you do not move around, but when you take it, buffs the stuff blah 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 to its left or whatever. The same thing I can picture them doing positional stuff with cards in their hand. I would love for them to borrow that kind of stuff. If the card's on your left side, gain crit, or if the card's the right side of your hand, or blah blah blah. That stuff's always fun too. So yeah, this is very fascinating, right? And again, I don't believe any other space is going to talk about these things, but yeah, there's this weird phenomenon going on. Every dev blog I read, I'm like, oh my god, what is Mega Crit cooking? But then when I look, it's like, oh yeah, it's just all this stuff from these other games. Well, of course, right? Of course. Of course. What else are you going to do? You're not going to out gimmick all the gimmicks that everyone had to create for years because Slay the Spire boiled everything down too well, right? So it's very fascinating. It's very fascinating.